again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic and sometimes funny topic, so let's do it. Police officers of Reddit. What was your they would have gotten away with it if they just kept their mouth shut moment? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Not me, but my boyfriend. Boyfriend's working overnight when a guy comes through town doing 35 and a 25. Boyfriend pulls the guy over and asks for his documentation, license, registration, and insurance. Guy flips open his glove box, snatches his documents out, and snaps the glove box closed super fast. Boyfriend laughs and says, "What do you have in there?" Guy gets a little sheepish and says, registration, insurance, whispers, a little bit of weed, ends whisper. Boyfriend, what? Guy coughs and says, registration, insurance, and a little bit of weed. Boyfriend laughs again and says, seriously? Can I see? Guy got a slap on the wrist for being honest and having a very small amount. So this happened a few years ago. I was patrolling with my buddy at night. It was almost the end of our shift. Suddenly we get an alert that a local nearby gas station had just been robbed, unsuccessfully, and that the suspect was supposed to pass by us in a red car. Indeed, seconds later, we saw a man speeding through the road. Details on the side. We ended up catching him on a dead-end street. When my buddy was handcuffing the suspect, I asked the suspect if he had had something to do with the robbery. He repeatedly said, "I've never been there. Ask the ginger lady." Turns out the cashier that night was an old lady named Marcy, covering for her ill daughter, whom would have never been able to identify him since he was wearing a black mask during the robbery, which we never found. Marcy had ginger hair. Fortunately, the suspect was kind enough to inadvertently confess the crime. How could he know the appearance of the cashier if he had never been at the crime scene? The jury thought the same. Pull over this guy for expired tabs. Ask for his ID, and he's feeling around for his wallet. Can't find it. He says, "Oh man, I'm one of you at school." "Oh, what department?" Actually, I'm a security guard, but same thing." I'm polite. "So where's your ID?" "Oh, it's in the..." And he motions to the trunk. "It's in the trunk?" "Actually, no. My BS radar is going off." "Okay. Want to get you ID out of the trunk?" "Nah, I don't have it." He starts looking around for another story to use, but now I know I'm supposed to stay out of the trunk. He's also not giving me any more information. "No ID? Then I have to take you in and get you fingerprinted. I'm going to get into that trunk one way or another." He's looking like he's lost. I ask him what's in the trunk, but he's not talking anymore. We pull him out and get him in cuffs. Another officer takes him to get ID'd through fingerprints. Since his car is expired past 6 months, California, we towed the car. In the process of getting ready to tow the car, we need to take a quick inventory. In the trunk was a police uniform with fake patches and a metal badge, no gun, but a duty belt. He also has stacks of child pee. This is a guy who a neighboring city had been looking for months. His MO was to dress as a police officer, talk to kids, and you can figure out the rest. If he just gave me his name, I could have looked up his ID and verified he had one. I'd probably let him go, but... Edit. The neighboring city had zero information as to his name. They only had a vague description of the car and the fact he was posing as a police officer. In fact, what he would do is start talking to a kid in the 9 to 12-year-old range, tell him he has to be taken in for questioning, handcuff the kid, and take him to his car. He was a bad dude. Well, it's great that you caught such a vile human being, but boy, what an idiot. He wouldn't have gotten away with it, but a patron of the bar that my sister worked at many years ago was stopped by the troopers while driving along next to the highway in the ditch. His explanation? "Officer, I'm way too drunk to be on the road." Not me, but my dad. My dad was in an Army helicopter unit assigned to the local police to search for marijuana plants being grown in the rural parts of my state in the 1980s. One day, they found a decently sized gaggle of marijuana plants located just off the property of a farm. They landed the helicopter on the farm and talked to the farmer. asking him if he knew that someone was growing weed near his property. The farmer got scared and immediately confessed that they were his plants. He was arrested by the police. Oddly enough, if the farmer would have played dumb, the army and the police were just going to remove the weed and leave. While I was in field training, I was investigating a hit and run. A lady parked her car on the street in front of her house and found it all smashed up the next morning. My field training officer was like, "Yeah, these usually are hard to solve unless there's video footage or we find a smashed up car nearby." We were wrapping up and about to leave when this woman walked up to my window of the squad car and was like, "I did that. I was coming back to say I was sorry. Case closed." She got a ticket instead of being arrested because I appreciated her honesty. She probably avoided a DUI by leaving the scene the previous evening. She said she had left her friend's house at about 3 a.m. and she couldn't provide an explanation for why she slammed into a parked car on a residential street. A friend told me a story about when he and his teenage friends had a shitty garage band. They were jamming one night and some family members get into it with her boyfriend in the house. Cops were called. They stopped playing and go outside to watch. A cop walked over to them to find out who they were. One kid straight up admitted that he had been drinking that night. Because that wasn't what the cops were there for, and he didn't see anyone drinking, he said he didn't care. The kid took that as permission, walked into the garage, and walked back out with his beer. Now the cop cared enough to take him to jail. Not a cop, but was part of a jury. This guy is being questioned about an R, and he tells the officer that it's all bullshit, just like the thing 10 years ago. His ex-wife is just a lying bitch trying to get him in trouble. Cop starts looking into his record from 10 years ago and finds out he was under suspicion for another R but left town before he could be questioned, so it got put aside. That prosecutor retired, and it got set aside. We convicted him on all counts, and he got 25 years in prison, and the new case, I believe he pled guilty since he's already facing the rest of his life in prison. Had he kept his mouth shut, they wouldn't have even looked that far back. Now he will probably never leave prison. Absolutely never admit to any crime without a lawyer present. Just because you know you did it and the cops know you did it, it doesn't mean it'll hold up in court or that they'll think it's worth the time to prosecute it. You don't need them to think you're a good guy who made an understandable mistake. You need to stay out of a cage. Keep your mouth shut. The only word you should be saying is lawyer. Sounds like pretty sound advice. I mean, if you either watch shows or speak to friends who are attorneys or family members, they generally say the same thing, so we should probably do that, right? Do you think the cops get mad at you and would be more aggressive in prosecuting if you just ask for your basic rights? Former cop here. We always had a statement that we used if we ever got in trouble, and it applies to anyone. No poly, no waiver, no statement. Basically, never consent to take a polygraph, never waive your rights, and never make a statement. You may think you're doing yourself a favor by answering questions and trying to be helpful, but more often than not, you'll end up digging your own grave. Be polite about it, but respectfully refuse anything until you've spoken to a lawyer. Defendant, not an officer. My buddy and I were drag racing through town late one night, drag racing in my used beater-ass Buick, so speeds were low and nobody was in danger. Flashing lights behind us, my buddy gets pulled over and I get away clean. Later that night, we get a phone call. The officer asked my buddy, "Who's your friend?" Because he didn't even get my plates. And my buddy, not great under pressure, responded by giving him my name, address, and phone number. Cue summons to court for both Buddy and I. It's the day of. We're at the courthouse dressed in the closest thing to suits that two idiot high school boys have, surrounded by our parents and siblings in their Sunday best. My case was first. Buddy was subpoenaed to testify against me because he was the only witness that I was present. The trial starts, but the officer isn't there. Let me repeat all that. There is no officer on the other side of the court. My buddy is the only witness that either of us were racing that night, and he gets up on the stand. Let me also remind you that he's not great under pressure. Judge: were you racing that night? Buddy: yes, sir. We were racing. Drag racing, specifically, sir. Judge: and your friend here was who you were racing against? Buddy: yes, sir. His name's W Knight 8111, and we were drag racing together. Judge: are you sure about all that? Let me remind you that there's no plaintiff in court today. You're the only witness, and what you say goes. If you say you two weren't racing, that's what I'll have to believe. So again, are you sure that you and W Knight 8111 were racing? Buddy: yes, sir. Drag racing, sir. That mother lover cost me like $500 and more than a few points on my license because he couldn't just keep his mouth shut. When I was a cop, my squad mate and I were foot patrolling an area that was being burglarized heavily in a nice neighborhood. We saw a dude walking wearing sportswear and decided to have a chat with him to see if he's seen anything suspicious. Because we were extremely close to his house, he invited us to his home and talk. So we walked and talked, and he invited us into his home. The dumbass didn't think about this because he had left out bags full of stolen items on the kitchen table. Sorted out as well, he's had his burglary tools on the counter of the kitchen. After a minute, we realized this dude was breaking into his neighbors' houses and stealing their stuff. If he didn't invite us inside, we would never guessed he was the one doing it. Not a cop, but my dad retired recently. He was called in on a murder case of a drug deal love triangle gone wrong. The original two lovers bring the third to do drugs and sexy time. Something goes wrong, so partner 1 shoots and kills the third wheel. Partner 1 and 2 put the third wheel in a larger plastic container and bury it in their basement, which had dirt floors. They were scheduled to get concrete poured over the dirt. The third wheel was an out-of-towner and didn't have any family, so no one asked questions. Partner 1 and 2 get into a fight. Partner 1 calls the cops and confesses that Partner 2 killed someone and that he buried him in the basement. Both ended up getting charged and eventually convicted. So a friend of mine and some of his buddies went to the Padres game and got shit-canned. I was down in DT San Diego with my future wife on a date at House of Blues, and they rolled up on us while we were eating on the outdoor patio. Whole shit were they wasted. I told them to beat it, and we were nowhere near the level they were at, so they needed to take their shit show elsewhere. Fast forward to the next morning, and I get a call from my buddy asking us to come bail him out. Being a good friend, I go down with my future wife and we bail him out. So it turns out, they went to the parking garage they were in and were drinking more beers out of the trunk of their car. A security guy was cruising the lot and told them they couldn't be drinking out in the open. And of course, my buddy and his friend start talking shit to the security guard that he has no authority, etc. Security tells them he can call the cops in to handle things, and they all keep busting his balls, so he calls the cops. They show up, and these dumbasses are still drinking beers. Cop tells them they have to throw the beers out, and then they're good to go, and he'll take off. If they chose not to throw away the beers, then he will take them to jail for public intoxication. 3 of the 4 guys walk to the trash can and throw their beers away. My one buddy turns to the cop and yells, "Whoopity-doo," and takes a big swig of his beer. 2 seconds later, he's on the floor, cuffed, and off to jail he went. Not a police officer, but there was a motorbike robbery in my town, and the criminal would have gotten away with it, but he filmed himself doing it, even turning the camera to himself, full face view, no disguise or anything. He got caught straight away. From what I know, as this took place a few years ago, he sent it to his friend, reportedly to look cool or something, I don't know, who snitched on him. He became forever known as the town's dumbest criminal, and he would have gotten away with it if he kept his mouth shut. Earning the moniker of world's or town's dumbest criminal can be difficult or sometimes very easy, and that person made it look really easy. Boy, social media. When I was 18 or so, I got burgled. I was lying in bed upstairs about to go to sleep, having just turned off my TV. I heard stumbling up the stairs and what sounded like fingers scraping down the door of my little sister's room, which was the first door on the landing. My first thought was my mom was wine drunk and checking on her, as I hadn't heard her come to bed. Footsteps then shuffled down the hall to my door, and the hand scraped down to find the door handle again. My door creaked open, and there was a silhouette of a tall, broad-shouldered man, who was certainly not my mom. I yelled, "Who are you?" And he leapt out of bed and tried to chase this effer, which was incredibly stupid for anyone to do, let alone a teenage girl, but adrenaline's a funny thing. The guy was much quicker than me, and flew out of the house and vanished before I could get to the front door. I found his break-in point and secured it. The window above my dog's bed. Thanks, Harvey. 0% good boy that night. And then I called the police and woke up my mom, who was asleep in bed. Police took fingerprints, and a few weeks later they got a match. When they brought the guy in for questioning, he admitted that he was checking we were asleep before he torched our house. There was no evidence at all that he was going to do that, and he was only to be charged with breaking and entering. If he had kept quiet, he would have likely been let go with a suspended sentence or something. Instead, he got charged with B&E and attempted murder. Our house was picked at random, by the way. Guy just really wanted to do the crime.